Namaste. Welcome you to the short video on households' energy consumption in Nepal. In this video, we will explore to what extent households in Nepal have been connected to the national grid and the extent to which households consume energy. In households, people could use energy for different purposes: for lighting their rooms, for cooking their meals, for heating their rooms, and for cooling themselves. So when we talk about household energy consumption, we are talking about energy consumption for these various purposes. Why is an examination of household energy consumption important? According to Water and Energy Commission WECS report, residential sector accounts for as high as 60% of the energy consumed in Nepal. In other words, for the total energy consumed in Nepal, 60% is consumed by the residential sector. This is followed by the industrial sector and then the transport sector. Examination of the energy consumed by residential sector is important in a context where more and more electricity is being generated in Nepal. Does Nepal have the capacity to consume the abundant electricity being generated in the country? Does the residential sector, which is the biggest consumer of energy, have the capacity to observe the electricity being generated or will be generated in the near future?
It is important to make a distinction between energy and electricity. There could be different types of energy. These could be firewood, biogas, coal, diesel, petrol, etc. Electricity is one specific type of energy. In this video, we explore to what extent electricity, which is one specific type of energy, is used for lighting, cooking, heating and cooling by households in Nepal. We will explore which other types of energy is used for these various purposes. We will also explore to what extent the usage of electricity for these four purposes has changed during the past 30 years. In doing so, we will explore the transition from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable energy and examine the relationship between energy poverty and energy transitions. This video is based on a nationwide survey undertaken by Interdisciplinary Analysts, or IDA.
The survey was conducted in 2023 using a carefully designed random sample to ensure national labor representation and a minimal margin of error at a 95% confidence level. The survey, which has a sample size of 1,300 households, was selected through random sampling across 21 districts. The survey was carried out across 9 urban areas and 54 rural areas that had been selected randomly. Although the sample size is 1,300, since the sample has been selected scientifically, it represents with a certain margin of error all the households of Nepal as far as their energy consumption behavior is concerned. Our team of 18 innovators and 6 supervisors were first thoroughly trained, and then we deployed to the 21 districts across the country that had been sampled. Data collection was underway in June and July 2023. According to the survey, 98% of households have access to electricity. Of these, for 88% of households, their primary source of electricity is the national grid connection provided by the Nepal Electricity Authority (NEA). Another 5% are connected to off-grid micro hydropower, and another 5% have solar PV home system. The survey asked about the various utilities that people have in their homes, as well as the amount of money they pay for these utilities. Electricity and mobile recharge card were the most commonly used utilities, with adoption rates of 93% and 88% respectively. Households spend the most on internet connectivity, followed by mobile communication, electricity, and water.
What do people use for lighting up their rooms? people use electricity made available through the grid for lighting purposes. When we asked this question, we allowed for multiple responses since people could use more than one source for the purpose. Interestingly, besides national grid, rechargeable devices were mentioned by 50%, candles by 19%, solar PV by 12%, battery-powered lights by 10%, and oil lamps by 3%. From this data, we can infer that there are pockets in the country that still do not have grid-connected electricity, or where reliable electricity is an issue. Unannounced load shedding still occurs in rural areas, so it is understandable that people resort to rechargeable devices when this happens. Likewise, thunderstorms could also disrupt electricity supply, and thus the need to keep rechargeable devices. What about energy for cooking purposes? What do people use? The survey found that 74% of households use firewood for cooking, followed by LPG gas, which was reported by 62%. Only 8% mentioned electricity for cooking purposes. Rural households primarily use firewood for cooking, while urban households predominantly use LPG gas. While rural areas use more agricultural residues and animal waste, urban areas have begun using electric energy more frequently. Although firewood continues to remain the main cooking fuel in Nepal, it is interesting to note that forest cover has not really decreased. In fact, forest cover for the past 30 years has been increasing. This is a positive feature in Nepal and vouches for sustainable forest harvesting practices and effective community forestry management in the country. Those who use biogas pay the least amount of money for the fuel. On average, those using biogas reported paying only 9 rupees per month. However, only 3% of households report using biogas. Although it is cheap, the number of households using biogas has not increased. This is partly because family sizes are decreasing, which in turn is due to migration for work out of the country and fewer households engaged in animal husbandry, which affects the operation of biogas systems.
What do people use for cooling their rooms and themselves? The survey shows that 63% of households use cooling appliances, predominantly ceiling fans with table and wall-mounted fans also being common. Air cooler and AC are used much less frequently. Not surprisingly, the Tarai region has higher usage of ceiling fans compared to the hill region. What do people use for heating their rooms, especially in the winter months? 75% of households reported using heating devices during the winter months, with firewood being the most common fuel. A small percentage use other fuels like agricultural residues, animal waste, electricity, LPG, or kerosene. Rural areas primarily use traditional fuels like wood and agricultural residues for heating, whereas urban areas favor modern sources like electricity.
One important usage of electricity is for charging mobile phones. You can use different sources of energy, like firewood or kerosene, for cooking, but you cannot do that for charging mobile phones. For charging mobile phones, you need one special type of energy, and that is electricity. One important contribution of electricity either through grid or off-grid, which in turn could be either solar PV or microhydro, is being helping charge mobile phones. The survey shows that more than 90% of the households at least one mobile phone, while 28% of individuals own regular mobile phones, 49% own smartphones, and 13% have both types. In fact, On an average, a household owns 2.6 mobile phones. The survey shows that smartphones are mainly used for communication, followed by entertainment, internet access, information gathering, work, online banking, and online shopping.
The survey also tried to look at energy transitions taking place in Nepal during the past 30 years. It did so by comparing the situation today with the situation in the past. The greatest progress seems to be in lighting. While only 14% households reported having access to electricity for lights in their homes 30 years back, almost 98% report that today. 30 years back, the main source of light in rooms was kerosene, with as high as 85% reporting it. This is a big progress. Progress in other usages does not seem to be as dramatic. For cooking purposes, majority of households still use firewood, as they did 30 years back. However, the proportion mentioning this has declined. While 98% mentioned that they used firewood to cook 30 years back, those reporting so is now 74%. For cooking purposes, LPG gas seems to have taken off. While less than 1% reported LPG 30 years back, 62% report using it today. Electricity-based cooking also seems to be growing, but at a slow pace. While less than 1% mentioned cooking in electricity 30 years back, this has increased to 8% today. There has not been much change as far as heating is concerned. Firewood remains the primary source of heating for households, though its usage has declined from 95% to 84%. While electric heaters were virtually non-existent 30 years back, they are now used by 9% of households. There have also been some changes as far as cooling is concerned. While only 2% reported using electric fans 30 years back, 63% report using it now.
As mentioned in the beginning, examination of the energy consumed by the residential sector is important in the context where more and more electricity is being generated in Nepal through the hydropower plants being built by the state and the private sector. Does the household sector have the capacity to observe the abundant electricity being generated in the country? We asked people if they are likely to use more electricity if cheap and reliable electricity were to be made available, and if yes, for what would they likely be using it for? Surprisingly, 49% said they will not use more electricity even if cheap and reliable electricity were to be made available. It was mainly households with low income levels, and that had only elderly people living in them who said this. 51% households said they will use more electricity if cheap and reliable electricity were to be made available. The most frequently mentioned usage was cooking food in electric appliances, followed by household heating, followed in turn by using electricity for agriculture-related appliances. 7% mentioned that they will use cheap and reliable electricity for charging their vehicles. What the data indicates is that there is needed a capacity in the residential sector to observe the electricity being generated in the country.
For energy policymakers and planners, this first-time detailed nationwide energy survey provides the basis for rethinking conventional approaches and forging a new, more effective energy development path ahead. There were quite a few surprises, both pleasant and unpleasant. While firewood is still the major usage, despite some decline over the decades, it seems to be currently done through sustainable harvesting, thanks to community forests, rather than contributing to rampant deforestation. LPG use has skyrocketed, but the good news is that in rural areas, most households use it for quick and clean convenience when guests come visiting, rather than as a mainstay which remains firewood. The bad news is in the electricity sector, where, despite its coverage reaching 98%, Nepal remains one of the lowest per capita per annum electricity consuming countries, with its consumption half that of Bangladesh and 1/4 that of India. Almost half the population does not want to invest in increasing electricity consumption. Primarily, it seems, because of two reasons: lack of youth who have out-migrated, with old folks lacking the drive for industry, and an extractive, rent-seeking governance which discourages entrepreneurship. This IDA survey, together with our work on pump storage hydro, can thus form the basis of an evidence-based reformulation of energy policy to reverse the negative and encourage the positive trends in Nepal's energy consumption.
On behalf of interdisciplinary analysts, I would like to thank various institutions. I am grateful to Associate Professor Dr. Mine Islar and Associate Professor Dr. Sarah Brogard at Lund University Center for Sustainability Studies, or LUXUS, for partnering with IDA in this important research. The survey was undertaken under the research project Double Energy Transitions, connecting climate goals with local realities in Nepal, which is supported by the Swedish Academy. We are thankful to the Swedish Academy for supporting us in this work. The main findings of the study were shared by participants representing the government, private sector, academia, researchers, and development practitioners on November 21, 2023. We'd like to thank all of the participants for sharing their feedback on the findings, including making the study more policy relevant. Thank you.